Sabres do not keep their win streak rolling. A very tough result in Carolina and a very interesting trade rumor report from Frank Saravelli on JJ Peterka. Does trading Peterka make any sense for the Buffalo Sabres? We'll talk about it coming up on this edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome in, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. That does include checking us out on our YouTube channel where you can watch the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on a Friday, going into the weekend. Sabres got a home and home coming up against Montreal, but we got a lot to get to on today's show before we talk about what's coming next, and that is a disastrous game last night in Carolina that did not get the result that we were hoping for. They do not win in Carolina again. They have not won there in 9 years, and it's probably going to be 10 because they didn't have it last night. But we'll get to that. And then JJ Peterka, not somebody I think we've talked about extensively, at least. Maybe it's come up in passing, the idea of trading all year, but we have reason to talk about it today. We have reason to talk about JJ Peterka as we are exactly 1 week out from the NHL trade deadline. And I don't know how eventful of a deadline that it's really going to be. I've seen a lot of these trade bait lists and whatnot, and there's not many interesting names that are on there. In fact, there are usually a lot of Sabres. I think if you are working at TSN or Sportsnet, you know, the big Canadian media companies that cover the deadline and have their big trade center shows that run all day long with the counter and everything. If you work for one of those networks, you badly want the Sabres to be involved. You want them to be active next Friday because they've got a lot of players that would spice it up, right? If Bo Byram was traded, if Dylan Cousins was traded, if Peterka was traded, or anybody like this, Alex Tuck, they've received calls on. The Vultures are continuing to swarm in Buffalo, and not yet has one dove in to grab the carcass, but they're trying. They're trying. So we'll get to that, though, coming up a little bit later on in today's episode. Reminder, if you would like to become a member of our Locked On Sabres text club and you're not already a subscriber, you want to sign up, you can go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. And then from there, you're just texting with us and receiving texts. And one of the most recent texts we got is, well, at least the Amherst play tonight. And that is, where we're at a lot of these nights down the stretch in the spring is at least the Amherst play, and at least they're in first place. Who do the Amherst have tonight? They have been winning a lot lately. Devin Levi, of course, has been great. They play Utica at Utica tonight at 7:00. I got one question about that. If you're ever like to watch the games, the AHL is on Flow Hockey, which is a hockey subscription company, and to get that, I know it's a amount of money that's not like super, super cheap. It would be another one of these streaming packages. Here we go. Actually, $12.50 a month is their annual plan, and then $29.99 if you're not doing the yearly. So if you wanted the rest of the Amherst season, March and April, and probably into May, like you're talking $90 to watch the rest of the Amherst season. You'd like that to be a little bit cheaper, I think, right? Like, I think a lot more Sabre fans and a lot more hockey fans would grab that package to watch the AHL if it wasn't so expensive. It's more expensive than every streaming app that you probably own. But anyways, let's get to the Sabres and their loss in Carolina last night. And the story of this game was basically written in the first 10 minutes. The Buffalo Sabres had one of their worst periods that I can ever remember. And it's hard to look up these numbers, like what's your worst by period and whatnot. But I have to believe that they have not had a period all year that is worse than what they had, which was in the first period, 36 shot attempts for Carolina, 5 for the Buffalo Sabres. That is shot attempts. 36 for the Hurricanes and 5 for the Buffalo Sabres. The ending shot total was 15-3. That's at 5-on-5, by the way, that it was 15-3. Scoring chances at 5-on-5, 20 for Carolina, 1 for Buffalo, 7-1 in high danger chances. These are the types of numbers that you see when Canada plays Norway in a hockey game. That's the kind of numbers that you saw in this first period. I don't really know what happened, why it happened from the Sabres perspective, other than they're playing a team that's really good, has been great for a long, long time. They are a hockey team, the Carolina Hurricanes, that can drag you into a game like that, where you're just chasing and you're chasing and you're chasing and you're exhausted by the end of it. Dahlin and Byram and these guys, Reimer at the end of the game, these guys are falling over because they're so tired by the end of that game. That's Hurricanes hockey. Hurricanes hockey is we're going to have the puck all night long and we're going to gas you out. And that's been working for them for 6 years. It has not worked for them in the playoffs, but it has absolutely worked for them in the regular season. They have been arguably the best regular season hockey team for 6 years running now. So not a lot of teams win there. Not a lot of teams have success in that building. The Hurricanes have the most home wins in the NHL this year. So not to say the Sabres don't deserve blame. I thought Dahlin had a very rough night, and that is very rare. I thought Byram was horrific. One of his worst games that I can remember all year. He was making mistake after mistake. He is the culprit on that first goal that Carolina scores with a sloppy turnover behind the net. He also almost died in this game. Byram, by his own, he tries to make a hit and he goes into the turnbuckle on the board. So just was not a good night for those two. And again, that's rare. That doesn't happen much. I just talked about how great they've been as a pairing, and there they go off and put that performance out there. But hey, that's Carolina. That's what Carolina can do to you. And I kind of want to think that it's more to do with how strong of a team that is, how strong of an opponent it is, than the Sabres did anything wrong. And it's a bit of a reality check, right? Like, here I've been sitting for a week telling you, and I still believe it, that the Sabres are a better team than the standing show, that that the breaks go their way if they get some better power play numbers or a better goaltending year, that this very easily could have been a playoff team, and that they are better than a lot of teams ahead of them. I think they're a better team than Pittsburgh. I think they're a better team than Philadelphia. I think they're a better team than the New York Islanders and maybe even a couple of others. Better than Montreal, even if you want. I think they're a fine hockey team. But that's what a great team looks like. That's that you're punching above your weight if you're trying to match up with a team like Carolina. So to me, that was really the story of the game. The numbers end up not looking horrific at the end in the second and the third period, I should say. The first period, of course, was disastrous. The Sabres played even with them in the second and the third, and they held it to within 2 for a lot of that game. They cut it to within 2 early in the third period and then just never felt like they got close to making it a 1-goal game. So even when it was a 2-goal game for the many minutes that it was, I really was not much of a believer that they were going to get back in that game and tie that hockey game. And that's what ended up happening. The other thing that happens in that game that's a little bit weird is that's about as early of a goalie pull as I can remember on only 2 goals. If a goalie gives up 5 goals in the first 10 minutes or 4 goals in the first 10 minutes and he gets pulled, it's like, okay, not a big surprise, right? Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen allowed 2 goals in the first 8 minutes of hockey, and Lindy pulled him. And that to me was a little weird. It was a little interesting. Just it's very early for that, right? And neither goal were really his fault all that much. So that was a little strange. Reimer came in and I thought looked pretty good. Reimer looked, I thought, very good throughout the night. And Reimer continues to look like their better goaltender. I mean, that's been true for months now. I'm not ready to roll with this take yet because I still don't think they'll do it, and I'm not even sure how right it would even be. But I'll say this. I've had the pondering thought about them upping the amount of Reimer games. Increasing the workload for James Reimer down the stretch here. Just especially the next month. Just see if you can, go on a little bit of a run here. You get completely out of the race, which you might even debate you already are, then fine. Go play Luukkonen because Reimer's not going to be back here next year. But Reimer's been better. Reimer with a 911 save percentage. He has one of the best quality start percentages in the NHL. This year, 85 of his starts are considered a quality start. And Luukkonen's been so down this year that I don't know. Does Reimer give you the best chance to win right now? I think it's at least debatable. Statistically, it's actually true. So maybe you up his workload a little bit. I wouldn't mind seeing him on Saturday against Montreal, to be honest. Put Reimer in there. When we come back, let's get to some trade conversation. JJ Peterka. Why are we talking JJ Peterka? Well, we'll tell you when we come back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. If you check out FanDuel, you might be wondering, like, how good is Carolina really? And you want to look at, the Stanley Cup odds. You go over to FanDuel and you're like, oh, plus 700. The Hurricanes, the second leading favorite to win the Stanley Cup, only behind Edmonton, and that's at plus 650. They are almost the Stanley Cup favorites this year. FanDuel Sportsbook, you can place live bets throughout every game. America's #1 sportsbook. So even if you miss the opening face-off or you want to bet on a third period comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. Keeps every moment of the game exciting, or, anything, golf tournament. The live betting for golf tournaments is very good because you get a lot of ebbs and flows. You might want to react to it. It's buy or sell kind of thinking. Never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, the Sabres fall 4-2 in Carolina. Next up is a home against the Montreal Canadiens, the first of which being at KeyBank Center on Saturday night. Now, we're talking trade a lot over the next week because it's the deadline coming up, and there are a lot of Sabres rumors. One today that I don't think Sabre fans were prepared for. Sabre Twitter, at least, certainly didn't seem to be ready for this. Frank Saravelli of Daily Faceoff today, he writes about Peterka. In fact, he made Peterka like the headliner of his story. He was ranking the deadline names to watch, like a trade bait board, kind of, that TSN does, his own version of that. He ranked them, and the picture, the headliner was Peterka. Buzz around Peterka. So he writes about him. Scoop, Peterka hits the trade targets, which is the name of the list, like a wrecking ball. A 23-year-old first-line winger with tons of untapped potential still. Sources say any team calling Buffalo has been met with resistance on Peterka, but the volume of calls has increased, and the amount of chatter around the league is growing louder. So why is he on the board? The Sabres haven't done anything to shake up their team yet. He has significant trade value. He's a pending RFA who will need a new contract. And oh, by the way, he will potentially be an offer sheet target this summer. Interesting little note there at the end that he will be an offer sheet target this summer. Believe it when you see it, right? Because there are so few offer sheets in the NHL. Before we get to that part of it, the idea of Peterka getting the Sabres getting calls about Peterka, this really shouldn't be surprising. We have heard at this point the same thing about Dylan Cousins, Bo Byram, Alex Tuck, and now JJ Peterka. Any Sabre that's not Tage Thompson or Rasmus Dahlin that holds value in the league there's a report that they've gotten a call on him. The Sabres are having conversations. That's happening. And there's no debate about it. Kevin Adams will speak a little bit later this afternoon with Chopin the Bulldog and WGR. He always says it. I'm always having calls. I'm always having conversations. By the way, that's not enough. Elliot Friedman said yesterday a very damning quote about Adams, that those around the league, when they think of Buffalo or what they feel about Buffalo, is the GM loves to have a lot of talk about these trades, and he just can't. He's always, I think he even used the word nervous to pull the trigger on these deals. When I saw that word nervous, like, that is a damning indictment from what the rest of the league thinks of you. It's something that fans have wondered about Adams for years. Like, is he trigger shy? And this would be the league telling you that the league thinks he is. The other GMs think that he is. He loves to talk to you about trades, but then he doesn't want to make a trade, right? So anyways, Peterka, not really even a huge story. I think that he is getting calls on him. Now, the fact that he's an offer sheet candidate and the fact that the volume of calls has increased. Like, this is less what we saw about Tuck. Tuck was more Tampa called on him and LA has interest. Like, you had these couple of specific teams that wanted him. This is more an indication that, oh no, everyone thinks that he might be available. And that would be my first question. Why do they think he's available? Is there something with the agent behind the scenes? Is there something with the player that's been said? And is there chatter about, he's not sure if he wants to stay there long term, or, he's not really sure that the contract situation is going to work out? I wonder more from the player end of things, if that could be what is sparking all of these trade calls. Just a guess. The offer sheet part of it to me is even more interesting about Peterka, because if that's all true, or if the Sabres arrive at they'd like to trade him themselves, which we'll get to what would make sense. Like, I find a hard time believing they would get to on their own initiative, the Sabres saying, oh, it's a good idea, we should trade JJ Peterka. I'll get to the couple of ideas that could make sense for. I just don't think they're likely at all. Offer sheet target this summer. I got into a little bit with a couple of guys on Twitter about this, about like offer sheet target. Why is he an offer sheet target? That doesn't make any sense. The Sabres have all this room and they love him, right? And he plays at the top of the lineup. Here's why I think you should be thinking about offer sheets for him or anybody else on the Buffalo Sabres. If I were an owner or a general manager on running another NHL franchise, I'll tell you what I would do. And then you tell me if you think there's a GM like this in the league, or if you think this makes sense. If I were running another team in the NHL, I would absolutely try to offer sheet a guy like a JJ Peterka. What I would want to be doing is, I've heard the rumors, I've heard the chatter, I've heard the complaints in Buffalo about the ownership group and not spending to the cap and not spending enough money. And, that might not even be real. Maybe there are good reasons why they haven't spent to the cap yet. Maybe they would. Maybe they would invest all the money in it. They deny all the talk that they don't have the full resources available to them. But if I'm running another team, let me put that to the test. Let's find out how committed you are. Terry Pagula and the whole Sabre organization. Let me find out how committed you really are to spending big on this hockey team. Let me do the old Shea Weber. Let me go look at a contract, the recent offer sheet examples, and what you've really seen the structure of those contracts be. Because if you look at the Sabres right now, they don't have almost any contracts that are signing bonus heavy, especially at the beginnings of seasons, right? You have guys that are basically even all the way through. If I am another team in the league, I'm looking at, again, the Shea Weber example from long ago, and other players that have big signing bonuses early in their careers. let me go find a structure that I can get Peterka on, and I'll give him all the money in the first couple of years. At least as much as I can. Let me max it out. Let me max out the amount that I really can do it. Let me pay him all the money in the first couple of years. Make the Sabres decide if they want to back up the Brinks truck and pay him all that money in the first couple of years, and then have a guy at the end of his contract, like you've seen this, where a guy's making $1 million in his final 3 years. Let me go do that. Let's see if you want to spend, Sabres. Let me test not your cap limits, not your opinion. Let me not test your opinion of the player. Let me test your will and desire financially. Because if I'm right, maybe I get one over on you. Maybe I prove that it's true. Maybe I'm able to steal the guy because I designed it financially in a way that I can do it. That is where I would think about an offer sheet for a guy like a JJ Peterka. Because otherwise, like, I don't think the Sabres hate him. I don't think that they would be unwilling to sign him to a contract that's worth his while. It's just more about the money part of it for me. Let's get to some packages that might make sense for JJ Peterka. If they were to trade him, what makes sense? I got a couple of examples, but again, it's a really tough one, and it's why everyone was scratching their head when this one came around, because what type of trade package makes sense for the Buffalo Sabres right now around a 23-year-old young player on a cheap contract? We'll get to it when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres is presented by Trade Coffee. If you're like me, you got to get up really early if you're just like me. But everyone's getting up early to go to work. I'm getting up at 4:45 in the morning, and your mornings have got to start. My mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands. They just weren't cutting it. And I'm get up too early to go out for coffee every day at the local coffee shop or the chain coffee shop. And that adds up money-wise anyway. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. I know I've been trying different things. I got one upstairs right now that the beans are from Ethiopia, and it's got like blueberry notes in them. So you get the really, just the notes is all you're getting, but really good. Took their quick quiz, under a minute. They matched you with some of the roast. Smelled incredible, tasted even better. First bag was a game changer. The subscription just makes it so easy. No more last minute grocery store runs or settling for whatever is on the shelf. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. That's drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL for 40% off your first order. drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. We're back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are talking some JJ Peterka trade debate, as he reportedly is a player the Sabres are getting calls on 1 week ahead of the NHL trade deadline. Let's get to what types of trades would make sense for Peterka if someone were to make the Sabres want to do it. The only trade that I think makes any sense for JJ Peterka is for the Sabres to say yes, is another team who is contending, but is maybe aging a little bit, decides, or even not contending, it doesn't have to be contending, just a team decides, let's swap an older, higher paid, veteran, good player for the younger, cheaper for now, JJ Peterka. Let me swap my age for some youth. The Sabres seem like a team that might like to swap some youth for a veteran. That's what you're looking for. Find a good team that's older that might want to start transitioning to finding some good younger players. And just for a couple of examples of that, these guys are not reportedly available for trade, but these are guys I think the Sabres might say yes to. Los Angeles, Adrian Kempe. He is 28 years old. He is 5 years older than JJ Peterka, and he is going into the final year of his contract next year. Peterka, 5 years younger. Kempe, veteran, better player, right? He's got a 40-goal season on his resume a couple years ago. He's got a couple of high 20-goal seasons. Kempe's a more proven player. Sabres get the proven player that you know what you're getting, and the Kings get a good player that you still might have some more upside in, and you're flipping your age if you're LA, who's a very old team. How about the Rangers? The Rangers need a shakeup, right? A team that needs a shakeup, like the Sabres do. Is Mika Zibanejad an idea? He's not my favorite idea. I'm just looking at their roster and thinking, all right, 31 years old, right? He's got 4 years left in his contract, 3 more after the season. You're getting 8 years younger. If you're the New York Rangers, if you're the Sabres, you are getting a veteran player that is at an age where you might think he's got like 3, maybe 4 years left of productive hockey if you're lucky. This year, he's already taken a little bit of a step back. He's on more of like a 60-point pace where he's been 72, 91, 81 in the last couple of years. Calgary is the other team that I had a texter write in about. Like, what about Nazem Kadri? I think you'd have to have more than Nazem Kadri. He's 34. That's you're getting now an 11-year age difference. You're on the right track though. Like these are the types of ideas you're talking about. I think the reality for me is that I'll trade Peterka if Elias Pettersson's involved. Like that's the idea. That's the only trade idea that exists in my mind right now for the Buffalo Sabres that makes a ton of sense. If Vancouver wants Peterka, if that's one of the teams it's calling, perfect. You can have Peterka. He could be one of the 2 guys that you get from me. You want Peterka and Byram instead of Cousins and Byram? I'll do that. That to me is still the trade that makes the most sense almost in every one of these hypotheticals. So if you're looking for a Peterka package that makes sense to me, the only avenue to drive down for that is find a team that needs a shakeup, needs to flip age from older to younger. And the guy's got to be really good. That's why I picked Kempe out. Like Kempe's really good. And that you have to at least have a guy that would play in the Sabres top 6 for me. But if you got a trade idea, you can hit us up on the text club for that. You can send it along on Twitter as well. Sabres and Montreal tomorrow, and then Sabres and Canadiens in Montreal on Monday. That's going to be the next 2 games coming up for the Buffalo Sabres. They try to continue this run. They're still in the Lindy Ruff plan, right? 7 of every 10 points built into that is you can lose a game to Carolina. So they're still on the plan, but they gotta win. They gotta win both these games. You got some weak opponents coming up. Win both against Montreal and then San Jose. All right, that'll do it for us here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you are looking for some more hockey talk, be sure to make your next listen Locked On NHL. For your second listen, they bring you the league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage that you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We will talk to you next on Monday after Sabres and Canadiens leading into another Sabres and Canadiens game. So we'll talk to you then on trade deadline week here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.